Miss Karen. We are reading some Thomas and Friends little stories here because we finally worked up to the letter T in our alphabet, and letter T is my favorite because T is for train and T is for Thomas. I have Thomas. Here, let me take this down here. Hopefully I won't mess this up too much. Okay, so I have Thomas, and he's got Annie. Chicken, move out of the way, chick. Thomas has Annie and Clarabelle, and he's hauling the mail today. And then we have James back here. He's old Indian number 5, and he has a T-Rex that's heading to the Sodor Museum. Okay, so let me get this kind of set back up. So I have some stories here that we'll read, and we're just going to let our little engines and their workhorses set up there. I think that works. Boop. Come back, chicken. We got a chicken on the track. Okay. So we will read Steam Engine Stories, Thomas and Friends. 3 Thomas and Friends adventures. Ooh, what can we do here? So these are, if you guys don't know who Thomas is, there's a whole group of stories about Thomas the Tank Engine that was written by the Reverend W. Aldray, and he is a British storyteller, Reverend. And Thomas is, something from Britain, one of those things that came out of there. So, the magic lamp. Narrow gauge engines work very hard. They puff and chuff all day, up and down the hills. One day, the winding gear that carried coal cars up and down the incline broke. Uh-oh. The engines had to work extra hard pulling heavy coal cars up and down that long, steep track until at the end of the day, they could ease their aching axles. That evening, Thomas puffed into the transfer yards. All the narrow gauge engines were there. Thomas was delivering steel winches and wires to repair the broken incline. "Listen, Thomas," hooted Rusty. "Skarloey's telling us a story from the hills." "Long, long ago," began Skarloey, "there was an old engine called Proteus. His lamp was so bright you could see it for miles around. Proteus said it was a magic lamp. He promised that if an engine ever found the lamp, their wishes could come true." "How do you know it was Proteus's lamp?" asked Duncan. "First, you would feel a rush of wind whenever the lamp is near," Skarloey puffed quietly. "Then you'll hear a strange creaking sound. And finally," he added, "you'll see it flicker off and on, off and on." Soon, Peter Sam puffed loudly. "I don't believe there's a magic lamp." Soon, all the steel winches and wires were loaded into Peter Sam's freight cars. "I have to go to work," huffed Peter Sam. "I'm a really useful engine, not a really silly one. The incline must be working by morning, so I won't be wasting my time looking for a silly magic lamp," he tooted proudly. Whew! And he steamed away. The moon was bright. Peter Sam huffed and puffed. "The magic lamp I know isn't true. It's just an old story, and quite silly, too." Peter Sam, clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. Suddenly he felt a whoosh wind. His axles rattled as his couplings creaked. "What's happening?" Peter Sam whistled. He was so surprised he puffed right past the junction and up the wrong line, away from the incline. Peter Sam didn't believe Skarloey's story about Proteus's magic lamp, but then he heard a creaking sound, and his wheels began to wobble. Up ahead, a light flickered, off and on, off and on. And then he saw it. Oh! It was the fogman's lantern. It creaked and croaked as it swung outside his cabin. Peter Sam felt better. He chuffed past. Peter Sam was now even further from the incline. "The magic lamp, I know it isn't true. It's just an old story and quite silly, too." he puffed quietly to himself. Then suddenly there was another and a light was flickering on and off, on and off and on. The wind was creaking. The wind, the creaking sound, and the flickering light. Could it be Proteus's lamp? Thought Peter Sam. Then he saw it. It was Proteus's lamp. It was the light from a campfire at the children's campground. And it was the trees that were creaking in the wind. I knew it all along, sighed Peter Sam. But now he chuffed on even more slowly. Peter Sam was at the bottom of a steep hill, and now he was completely lost. I wish I could find the incline. I wish I could be safe at home in the sheds with the other Indians. I wish, Peter Sam puffed quietly, I wish I could find Proteus's lamp. Perhaps then my wishes could come true. Suddenly he felt a whoosh of wind around his wheels. Then he heard the strangest and then he saw a flickering light that flashed on, off, and on. It came from the top of a hill. Peter Sam gasped. It must be Proteus's magic lamp. He knew he had to go up the hill and find it. The wind whirled and stirred. The sound became a whoosh and a whoosh. And then the light flickered brighter and brighter. Peter Sam puffed to the top of the hill. And there was Harold the helicopter. His blades made a wind that whirled and stirred. The sound of the whoosh, 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 as the blade spun around. And Harold's bright light flickered on and off and on. Peter Sam was very surprised. Harold, he gasped. Hello, hummed Harold. I was dropping off some packages for the hill farms. What are you doing? I'm lost, Peter Sam said, and I'm going to be very late to deliver the winches and the wires to the incline. No problem, old buddy. I'll show you the way. And Harold took to the air. His strong light shone brightly and shone Peter Sam the way right to the incline. Later on the way home, Peter Sam couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Maybe, puffed Peter Sam quietly, you don't have to see the magic lamp for your wishes to come true. Maybe it's enough just to believe in it. Okay, so let's read another story here. This one is James Gets a New Coat. Okay, so where's James? There's James up there. Okay, remember he's got Tyrannosaurus Rex with him. So all Sir Topham Hatt's engines like to look bright and shiny, clean. They love being washed down and having their brass polished until it gleams. James was in the workshop being repainted. He was beside himself with joy. James thought being repainted meant he was special. The workmen painted and polished for an hour upon hour. Then, with new paint shining, brass twinkling, and blacking black, James returned to Tidmouth Sheds. Look, aren't you a beautiful red engine? He asked the others. No wonder Sir Topham Hatt thinks I'm special. But Percy was worried. He wasn't being repainted, and he wasn't red. Does that mean Sir Topham Hatt doesn't think I'm special? He asked. Looking splendid is not the same thing as being really useful, said Thomas firmly. But best of all is being really useful and looking splendid, like me, said James cheerfully. Before Thomas could say anything else, James closed his eyes and fell happily asleep. The next morning, the engines were very busy. Percy was working at the coal plant. Thomas and Emily were taking passengers up and down the branch lines. Gordon was pulling the express. Sir Topham Hatt came to see James. He told him to join Percy at the coal plant at once. The coal cars must reach Brindham Docks before the boats sail. So do not dilly-dally, he said. Yes, sir, said James, and he went off at once. But James didn't go straight to the coal plant. He decided to go to the canal instead. Then he could see himself in the water for the yard after yard after yard. Magnificent, he puffed. James had forgotten what Sir Topham Hatt had said. See, James, he's looking at himself in the water. At the coal yard, Percy was working hard as he could, but he was falling behind. The line of freight cars was getting longer and longer, and the yard manager was getting crosser and crosser. Where could James be? James was still enjoying himself, but there was no one around to share his fun, so he headed to Wilsworth Station. But as James pulled into Wilsworth Station, Gordon the Express were pulling out. The passengers had gone. Bother, said James. He was disappointed, and he left the station. James headed for the branch lines. James saw Thomas. Look at me, he puffed. Don't I look fine? You should be at work, called Thomas. But James didn't listen to Thomas. James was enjoying being James. But Percy wasn't enjoying being Percy. He was trying his hardest, but the troublesome trucks were being very naughty. Poor Percy was almost worn out. What will happen to the order now? Cried the yard manager. When James rolled into the plant yard, it was late in the afternoon. Percy was so cross, so was the yard manager. To make up for lost time, he said, you must take an extra long line of coals to the docks. James was delighted. The docks were always bustling with engines and people. It's the place to be seen, he said. The troublesome trucks are being very naughty, he warned Percy, but James still wasn't listening. James puffed along, looking forward to being seen. But the troublesome trucks were naughtier than ever. They rocked and rolled and crashed and bashed. James's face was soon covered in soot. Going downhill, the troublesome trucks wiggled and giggled. James had to put his brakes on with a jolt. Coal tumbled out of the troublesome trucks, landing on James. James was cross and biffed the troublesome trucks as hard as he could. More coal flew out. Now James didn't want to be seen. He was dirty as he'd ever been. But on his way to the docks, he kept passing his friends. He passed Emily and Edward and Thomas. Thomas thought that the only red thing left on James was his face. James trundled into Brindham Docks. He hoped no one would see him. But Gordon was at the docks with the express. He could not believe his eyes. He thought James was the grubbiest, grimiest, dustiest, dirtiest engine he had ever seen. Percy arrived safely at last, with the last of the coal cars. I like your new coat of paint, he puffed cheekily. You do look splendid. James knew he should have listened. He didn't feel splendid anymore. But for the first time all day, James could hear clearly. He could hear the sound of troublesome trucks giggling at him. And despite being foolish, even James had to smile. And I think we got one more in this book. Thomas and the Golden Eagle. There are many different animals on the island of Sodor. There are deers, cows, and sheep, and lots of beautiful birds. One morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to Tidmouth. A golden eagle had been seen at Bluff's Cove. He said, it's a very special bird. Bird watchers are coming from far and wide. Thomas and Percy both wanted to take the bird watchers to Bluff's Cove and see the golden eagle. But Sir Topham Hatt chose Emily. Percy, you are to collect milk from the dairy, said Sir Topham Hatt, and Thomas, you are to collect some stone from the quarry. It must reach Brindham Docks before the boat sails. Sir Topham Hatt left. Thomas and Percy were disappointed. I wish I was taking the bird watchers, Percy said. And I wish I could see the golden eagle, puffed Thomas as he set off. Thomas arrived at the quarry. There were freight cars of stone as far as he could see. Cinders and ashes, gasped Thomas. But as soon as he buffered up and puffed slowly away. Thomas had to stop at the junction to Buff's Cove. Percy was waiting there. They both watched Emily cheerfully chuff pass. Her cars were filled with happy birdwatchers. I wish I could go to Bluff's Cove, Percy puffed. Then Thomas had an idea. Percy liked ideas. My train is long and heavy, puffed Thomas. If you take half of my freight cars to the docks before you go to the dairy, I can go and find the golden eagle. Percy listened carefully. Then I will collect the other half of my freight cars, and it will be your turn to go and see the golden eagle. Percy thought that was a grand idea. Thomas shunted his cars onto the siding. It will be quicker to take half of the cars to Brindham Docks, Thomas said happily to Percy, and he headed for Bluff's Cove. Percy buffered up to the trains and puffed slowly away with half of Thomas's freight cars. Thomas arrived at Bluff's Cove in no time at all. He waited and he waited. He was sure the golden eagle would come, but the golden eagle was nowhere to be seen. Thomas was disappointed. Then Bertie the bus pulled up. "The golden eagle has been seen on Gordon's Hill," he cried. "How exciting! I must get there right away," cried Thomas, and he set off for Gordon's Hill at once. Thomas was so excited about seeing the golden eagle he couldn't think of anything else. He forgot about the freight cars full of stone, and he forgot about Percy. Percy had taken half of Thomas's freight cars to the docks. Now he headed for the dairy to deliver the milk. He was happy. He'd have time to see the golden eagle. But then Percy passed the siding near Buff's Cove. He was surprised to see Thomas's half of cars still sitting there. If the boat sails without them, Thomas will be in trouble, worried Percy. Percy decided to help his friends. Percy buffered up to the long line of freight cars and slowly puffed away. Percy got to the docks just in time. The quarry wagons were uncoupled, and Percy set off again for the dairy. He was feeling very tired. Thomas was feeling full of puff. He wished happily up Gordon's Hill. He was sure now he would see the golden eagle. Thomas watched, and he waited. Waited, and he watched. But the golden eagle did not come. "I'll never see the golden eagle," Thomas said. Suddenly, Thomas remembered his cars of stone and Percy. "Cinders and ashes," he cried, and he steamed off to the siding as fast as he could, but he didn't find his freight cars. He found Percy! He was stuck in a siding, and he had not taken his milk to the dairy. "I took all your freight cars to Brindham," peeped Percy, but now I've run out of coal." Thomas realized that now Percy couldn't see the golden eagle, and it was all his fault. Bertie the bus tooted excitedly. "The golden eagle has been seen back down the line," he called. "Hurry, Thomas!" But Thomas knew what he must do. "I must take the milk to the dairy," cried Thomas, "or Percy will be in trouble." The dairy manager was waiting when Thomas arrived. He delivered the fresh milk just in time. Then he set off to rescue Percy. Together, Thomas and Percy puffed slowly to the coal depot. But on the way, they were astonished to see there, high on the rocks, not one, but two golden eagles. Thomas and Percy watched the two beautiful birds. "Seeing two eagles is a wonderful thing," puffed Percy. "But not as wonderful as helping a friend," said Thomas. And they both happily agreed. Okay, so there, we've read a whole bunch of Thomas and Friends stories to round out our learning of the letter T. So, and again, we had our friends today. Let me take this back down. Okay, so we had Thomas here, and he had Annie and Clarabelle, and he was also hauling them in. Beep, beep. We also had James, who was carrying a load to the Sodor Museum. He had a T-Rex exhibit that he was carrying. Now, let's see what else I might have. I have our Ruffian Company ballast contractors in Tidmouth, Sodor. It says, let's hook this up to James. See how many cards he can pull. And then, what else? I have the big hopper car. Let's plug that up there. Boop. Oh, and he needs a load. Thomas, let's get out of the way. Let's let Harvey come back out and play. Okay, so here's Harvey. Okay, Harvey is one of the dock workers. But he's got this handy dandy magnet that he can pick things up. And he can lift them up, up, up. Oop, let go, let go, let go. Ah. And he can load things into the cars. Thank you, Harvey. Oh, no problem. Okay, so yeah, come back over here. So now let's look. Who does James have? So you have James and his tender. And he has a T-Rex. And he has some ballast. So ballast is what you would put under your railroad tracks. And he has a big hopper. And in the hopper, we have the shipping company. Oh, I bet maybe these are the railroad tracks. Okay. So, Thomas and friends, finishing out the letter T today. I hope you guys had some fun. I wish I could get out some more tracks to actually play on, but it's just kind of impossible to get to right now. So, there's been a long time reading, so I think it's time to take a break, and you guys go find a snack or something.